My parents live here now. Don't make them uncomfortable. That's what my daughter-in-law said when I came home from the hospital, still limping, still in pain. She stood at the door with her chin up like she owned the place. Behind her, my son just looked away. Not a word, not a single look of care. My heart dropped. The house I built with my husband, the home where I raised my son, suddenly wasn't mine anymore. My things were in boxes on the lawn. They told me I had signed everything over while I was sick. I didn't even remember doing it. I wanted to cry, to scream, but I didn't. I just smiled and said, "Enjoy it while you can." They thought I was weak. They thought they had won. But a week later, they learned how wrong they were. Tell me, what would you have done if your own family locked you out of your home? When I left the hospital, I thought the worst part was over. I was wrong. 17 days after my surgery, I came home. I was still weak, my back hurt, and I could barely walk without holding on to something. I was just happy to finally sleep in my own bed again. I paid the taxi driver, held my old bag tight, and walked to the gate. That house was all I had left after my husband passed away. Every wall, every piece of furniture had a memory. I had told myself 100 times during those long nights in the hospital, once I'm home, everything will be okay. But nothing was okay. When I reached the door, my son Daniel opened it. He didn't look happy to see me. He looked nervous, almost like I was someone who didn't belong there. Before I could say anything, my daughter-in-law Lydia appeared behind him. She crossed her arms and said, "My parents live here now. Don't make them uncomfortable." I just stood there holding my bag, not understanding what she meant. "What do you mean your parents live here?" I asked. "This is my house?" Lydia rolled her eyes. "Not anymore. You signed the papers. Everything's been transferred to us. It's all legal." For a few seconds, I couldn't even breathe. My hands started shaking. I remembered the papers she gave me in the hospital. She said they were insurance documents, just something for the hospital to process my surgery. I didn't read them. I was in pain, tired, just trying to get through the day. I trusted her. "Lydia, those papers were for the insurance," I said, my voice breaking. She shrugged. "You should have read what you signed." Then she looked at Daniel. "Tell her, Daniel." My son didn't say a word. He just looked down like a child caught doing something wrong. "Daniel," I said quietly, "you know this house. You grew up here. Your father built it with his hands. Tell her this isn't right." He finally looked at me, but his eyes were empty. "Mom," he said softly, "it's done. Don't make this harder." That sentence hit me harder than any pain I'd felt in the hospital. I felt something inside me crack. I looked past them into the living room. I saw boxes stacked by the wall, my boxes. My name written on them in black marker. Everything from my life was in those boxes, like I was being packed away and erased. Lydia's parents came out from the kitchen. Her father, Victor, was holding a glass of wine. He smiled like he owned the place. "Everything's settled," he said. "No need to cause trouble, ma'am." Her mother, Helena, crossed her arms. "Your things are outside," she added. "You should go rest somewhere else." I stared at them, trying to understand how strangers could stand in my home and talk to me like that. Then I looked at my son one more time. He didn't look at me. "You're really doing this?" I asked. "To your own mother?" He didn't answer. Lydia spoke again, her tone sharp. "You can stay at a hotel or something, but you can't stay here. We need space for my parents." I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I felt too tired to fight. I just nodded slowly. Then I said, "Enjoy it while you can." Lydia frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said. "Just a thought." I turned and walked toward the driveway. The pain in my hip made every step feel like a mile. Next to the garage, I saw my boxes. My clothes, old photo frames, my husband's books, all stuffed together like trash. I opened one box and saw our wedding photo, the frame cracked. My hand shook as I picked it up. That picture used to hang in the hallway. We smiled so big that day. I used to think we'd grow old together in that house. Now it didn't even feel like mine. I sat down on the edge of the steps. The cold went straight through my bones. I tried to breathe, but it felt like all the air had been taken from me. I don't remember how long I sat there. At some point, the door shut behind me. The sound of it closing still echoes in my head. It felt like the end of everything. No one came out. No one said goodbye. My own son shut me out like a stranger. When I finally got up, I took one last look at the house. The curtains were drawn, lights glowing inside. It used to be warm, full of laughter. Now it was just a house that didn't want me anymore. I called for a taxi. When it came, I got in without saying much. The driver asked, "Where to, ma'am?" I didn't know. I just said, "Well, I'm somewhere with a bed." As we drove away, I looked through the window one last time. My son's car was still in the driveway. The house looked peaceful from the outside, like nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. That night, in a cheap hotel room, I sat on the bed and stared at the broken frame. My reflection looked like a stranger. I felt lost, angry, and ashamed all at once. I thought of Edward, my husband. What would he have said if he saw this? Would he still recognize the son we raised? I closed my eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry, Edward. I failed." But deep down, a voice in me said, "No, you didn't fail. Not yet." That's when I made myself a promise. They took my house. They took my savings. But they wouldn't take my dignity. They thought I was too weak to fight back. They had no idea who I really was. When the door opened, I saw my son, Daniel. For a moment, I thought he would smile, that maybe he had missed me after all those days I was in the hospital. But his eyes were cold, empty, like he was looking at a stranger. Behind him stood his wife, Lydia, and right behind her were her parents, Victor and Helena Moreau. They looked too comfortable, like they had been living there for a while. Lydia smiled, that kind of smile that isn't really a smile, and said, "You're home early, Mother. We were just rearranging the house." I told her calmly, "Rearranging? This is my house, Lydia." Before she could answer, Victor spoke up with that proud tone I'd heard before. "No, ma'am. You signed the papers. The house is ours now." For a second, I thought I'd misheard. I said, "What papers?" Lydia crossed her arms and said, "The power of attorney. You signed them at the hospital, remember? Everything's legal." My hands started shaking. I remembered those papers she brought to me saying they were for insurance. I was in pain, dizzy from medication, barely able to hold a pen. She told me, "Just sign, it's for the hospital expenses." I trusted her because she was family. Now she was standing there, taking everything from me. I said, "You told me those were insurance documents." Lydia laughed softly. "Maybe you should have read before signing." Then she said something that cut deeper than anything else. "You always talk about love and family, but did you ever ask if anyone still needs you?" Those words broke something inside me. I turned to Daniel, hoping he'd stop this madness. "Daniel," I said, "are you just going to let them say that to me?" He didn't say a word. He looked down at the floor. My own son couldn't even look at me. I took a deep breath, trying not to cry, and said, "You grew up in this house. Your father built it with his hands. How can you let them throw me out?" He finally said in a quiet voice, "Mom, please, let it go. It's already done." I stared at him, not believing what I'd just heard. Let it go? How could I let go of my home, my memories, my whole life? Lydia stepped closer and said coldly, "Your things are outside by the garage. You can collect them and leave. My parents need space." I walked past them, my heart pounding. Victor said, "No need to cause trouble, ma'am. It's all legal." Helena added, "You'll be fine. Maybe a smaller place will be easier for you at your age." I ignored them. I went to the driveway and saw boxes stacked near the garage, my name written on each one in thick black marker. Everything I owned was in those boxes. I opened one and saw my wedding photo with Edward. The frame was cracked. I held it in my hands, trying not to fall apart. I found the unopened letter he left me before he died, the one I still hadn't had the courage to read. I pressed it against my chest. My whole life was reduced to a few boxes sitting, in the rain. Behind me, Lydia called out, "You should go now. You're making everyone uncomfortable." I turned around slowly and looked at her. "Uncomfortable?" I said. "You took my house, my savings, my memories, and you're the one uncomfortable?" She just shrugged and said, "I'm just being honest." I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. My voice was shaking, but I still said, "One day, Lydia, you'll understand what it feels like to lose everything." She rolled her eyes and turned away. I looked at Daniel one more time. "You let them do this to me," I said. "Your own mother, the woman who raised you. I worked double shifts, saved every dollar to give you a better life. And this is what I get in return?" He looked like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. He just stood there in silence. I told him, "You didn't just let them take my house. You let them take my dignity." For a moment, I thought I saw guilt in his eyes, but it was too late. That moment was gone. I turned away and started gathering my boxes. My body hurt, every step felt heavy, but I didn't want to ask for help. Lydia watched me from the porch, arms crossed, as if she was enjoying the view, when one of the boxes slipped from my hands and fell open, some old photo albums scattered across the ground. Lydia sighed and said, "If you don't take those, we'll throw them out." I didn't even look at her. I just said, "Don't bother, I'll take what's mine." I bent down and whispered to myself, "Edward, if you were here, tell me what to do." There was no answer, only the sound of the door closing behind me. The noise echoed in my head. It sounded final, like a full stop at the end of a long life. I stood there alone, surrounded by boxes that used to be my home. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just felt empty. I picked up the box with the wedding photo and the letter, and I called a taxi. When it arrived, the driver looked at me and asked, "Where to, ma'am?" I didn't know what to say, so I just whispered, "Anywhere but here." As the car drove away, I looked out the window and saw Lydia standing at the doorway, her arms around Daniel, like she had won something. Maybe she thought she had. Maybe they all did. But as I sat there in the back seat, clutching the box to my chest, I made myself a promise. They might have taken everything from me, but I wasn't finished. Not yet. They thought I was weak, that I would just disappear quietly. But I was done being silent. They would learn soon enough that a mother doesn't stop fighting, not even when she's been thrown out of her own home. After they threw me out, I went to a small hotel in Fremont called the Maple Rose Inn. It wasn't much, just an old building with yellow lights that flickered and walls that smelled of dust. The kind of place people go when they have nowhere else. The man at the front desk didn't ask questions. He handed me a key and said, "Room 12, end of the hall." I thanked him, even though my voice barely came out. The room was small, one bed, a table, and a radio that only played static. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners, and the carpet smelled like old rain. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the box I'd carried from the house. Inside was the wedding photo, some letters, and the few things they hadn't thrown away. I placed the photo on the table. Edward was smiling in it, proud and full of life. I whispered, "If you were here, you'd tell me what to do." That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat by the window, watching the rain fall on the street below, the sound of the cars, the smell of wet asphalt, the hum of the city. All of it felt far away, like I didn't belong anywhere anymore. Around midnight, I turned on the old radio. It played a soft jazz tune, the kind Edward used to like. I closed my eyes and let it play, trying not to cry. But the tears came anyway. By morning, I decided to call Clara Jensen, my oldest friend. We'd taught at the same school for years. She was a lawyer now, the kind of woman who always spoke calmly, even when everything fell apart. When she answered the phone, her voice sounded warm. The only thing that still felt familiar. I told her everything. Every word Lydia said. Every look Daniel gave me. How they threw me out like garbage. She didn't interrupt. She just said, "I'll be there in the morning." The next day I heard a knock on the door just after sunrise. When I opened it, Clara was standing there with her coat still wet from the rain. She didn't say anything at first, just hugged me. I hadn't realized how much I needed that until then. Then she pulled a folder from her bag, set it on the table, and said, "Evelyn, we need to talk." I sat down, my hands shaking a little. Clara opened the folder, and I saw bank statements, highlighted lines, and notes in her handwriting. Her face was serious, almost pale. "Evelyn," she said quietly, $230,000 were withdrawn from your accounts over the past 2 weeks. I just stared at her. The words didn't make sense. "What do you mean withdrawn? That money? That's all I had." She nodded. "I know. I checked everything twice. The transfers were made to a company called Moreau Holdings, Lydia's father's company." My hands started trembling. I gripped the side of the chair so hard it hurt. "They took everything," I said. "Not just the house. Everything." Clara reached for my hand, but I pulled it back. I didn't want pity. I wanted answers. I asked, "Can we do something? Can we get it back?" She hesitated. "It's going to be hard. They used your signature on those papers, and legally it looks valid. But if you signed under false pretenses, we might be able to challenge it." I leaned back in the chair and took a deep breath. My chest ached like I'd been hit. "They tricked me," I whispered, "my own family." Clara didn't say anything. She just looked at me, her eyes soft, full of something I didn't want, pity. I couldn't stand it. I stood up and walked to the window. The city outside was waking up. People walking, cars passing, life going on like nothing had happened. I thought about how just a week ago I had a home, a son, a life that felt stable. And now, all I had left was a small room in a cheap hotel and a box of memories. I said quietly, "I spent 30 years teaching children to believe in good things, to trust people, to be honest. I thought kindness would protect me. I really believe that." Clara looked at me but said nothing. I turned to her and said, "But I was wrong. Kindness doesn't protect you. It makes you easy to hurt." I felt something burn in my chest. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was anger. Real, deep anger. The kind that grows in silence when you've been pushed too far. Clara said softly, "Evelyn, don't lose yourself over this. We'll figure it out." I shook my head. "No, Clara. I've already lost everything. But maybe that's what I needed to wake up." For a while, we sat in silence. The rain had stopped, but drops still slid down the window. The jazz from the night before was still playing softly in the background, the same station, the same song. Clara packed up her things, promising to start looking into the case. Before she left, she turned to me and said, "You're stronger than you think." After she was gone, I sat back down and looked at the folder she left behind. My name, my accounts, my stolen money. It was all there, black and white, cold and cruel. I ran my fingers over the papers, feeling the edges bite into my skin. I thought of Daniel again. The boy who used to cry when he fell off his bike. The boy who used to bring me flowers from the garden saying, "For you, Mom." I tried to find that boy in my memory, but all I could see was the man who stood silent while his wife took everything from me. The anger inside me turned into something sharper, resolve. I whispered to myself, "They think I'm done, but I'm not." I folded the papers, placed them in the box with Edward's photo, and looked at his face again. "You'd tell me to fight, wouldn't you?" I said. "You'd tell me not to let them win?" For the first time since it all started, I didn't feel weak. I felt awake. That night, I wrote everything down, names, dates, what Lydia said, how Victor acted, every detail I could remember. I didn't know yet how, but I promised myself that one way or another I'd make them pay for what they did. I might have lost my home, my savings, and maybe even my son, but I hadn't lost myself, not yet. A week after Clara left, she called me early one morning. Her voice sounded tight, like she had been up all night. "Evelyn, I think I found something," she said. "Every dollar that disappeared from your account was transferred to a company called Blue Ridge Properties, registered under Victor Moreau's name." I didn't say anything for a moment. I just sat there holding the phone, staring at the wall. I asked quietly, "Are you sure?" "I checked twice," Clara said. "The company's been buying properties all over your neighborhood. Cheap ones, usually from elderly owners." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Suddenly, I remembered something my old neighbor, Mrs. Navarro, had told me a few months ago. She said a man from Lydia's family had come by, offering to help her refinance her home so she wouldn't lose it. They told her the same thing they told me, that they wanted to help. Now it all made sense. They weren't helping anyone. They were taking everything. I sat there in silence after Clara hung up. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't even notice. I felt my chest tighten with a mix of anger and disbelief. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us, the neighbors, the people who had lived on Maplewood Lane for decades, trusting the wrong people. That afternoon, I walked to the corner store owned by Mr. Patel. I'd known him for years. He always greeted me with a smile, always asked about Daniel, always slipped a candy bar into Sophia's hand when she visited. When I entered the shop, he looked surprised to see me. "Evelyn," he said softly, "I heard what happened. I'm so sorry." I nodded. "They took the house, and more than that, they took the money. Clara found out where it went. Blue Ridge Properties." Mr. Patel's face changed. He leaned closer and lowered his voice. "That name sounds familiar. 2 men came here last week. They offered to buy my house. Said they were from Blue Ridge. They said if I didn't sell, the city might rezone the block, and I'd lose everything anyway." I felt my stomach drop. "That's exactly what they told Mrs. Navarro," I said, "and she almost signed." He sighed. They're targeting people like us, Evelyn. People who don't fight back. I looked at him and said, maybe it's time we start. We sat down at the little table in the back of his store. The rain outside made soft tapping sounds against the glass door. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when you've both already lost too much. Mr. Patel poured 2 cups of coffee. They have lawyers, papers, signatures, he said, and we have nothing. Just memories. I looked down at my cup. Maybe we have more than that, I said. We have the truth. He smiled sadly. Truth doesn't win in court, Evelyn. Paper does. I leaned forward. Then we find paper. If they forged my signature, there must be proof. I still have copies of my old documents. Clara's digging into their company. Maybe we can show they used fake appraisals or false legal claims. We just need something solid. He looked at me like he wasn't sure whether to believe me. You really think we can beat people like them? I didn't answer right away. I thought about Lydia, about the way she looked at me when she said, "You should have read before signing." That moment had burned itself into my memory. I said, I used to believe that being good was enough. It isn't, but I'm not done yet. We talked for hours that afternoon, about the houses that had been sold, about neighbors who had moved away without saying goodbye. Every story sounded the same. Fake promises, fake help, and real losses. Blue Ridge Properties wasn't just stealing houses. They were building something, a plan big enough that no one noticed until it was too late. When I got back to the hotel that night, Clara was waiting for me in the lobby. She had her laptop open and papers spread across the table. You were right, she said as soon as I sat down. Blue Ridge has been buying properties in Maplewood for over a year. Almost every sale involves someone over 65. And guess who processed most of the transactions? I asked, who? She turned the screen toward me. Jessica Moreau. It took me a second to realize who that was. Lydia's maiden name? Jessica Lydia Moreau. She wasn't just part of the scam. She was running it. Clara showed me emails between Jessica and her father, Victor. They planned this together, she said. They knew your house was one of the few left on that block. They needed it to complete the area for redevelopment. I felt my stomach twist. Redevelopment? Clara nodded. There's a pending permit with the city. They want to build a new commercial complex, shopping centers, apartments. If they get approval, the land value will multiply 10 times. They used you, Evelyn, to take control of the last piece of land they needed. I stared at her, numb. They took my life's work for profit. She nodded again. And they've done it to at least 7 other families. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept pacing the room, my thoughts racing. I opened my box of photos, looking at the faces of neighbors who had been part of my life for so long, Mrs. Navarro, the Patels, the Andersons across the street. All of them had stories. All of them had trusted the wrong people. I thought about calling Daniel, but I didn't. What could I even say? That his wife and her family had used us all? That he had stood beside them and helped? No, he'd made his choice. Instead, I took out my old notebook and began writing names. Every person I knew who had lost their home in the past year, every suspicious sale, every family that had left Maplewood. The list grew longer than I expected. The next morning, I met Clara again. I handed her the notebook. These are all people who've been affected, I said. If we can get them to speak up, maybe the city will listen. She looked at the list and nodded slowly. If we can prove Blue Ridge used fraud, we can bring this to the authorities. But it won't be easy. I know, I said, but I'm not afraid anymore. Clara looked at me for a moment and said softly, You've changed, Evelyn. I smiled weakly. Maybe I finally stopped pretending everything's fine. That night, I called Mr. Patel again. We're not done, I told him. Tell Mrs. Navarro to hold off on signing anything. We're going to fight back. He hesitated. Are you sure? Yes, I said, because if we don't, no one else will. I hung up, looked at the box on my table, and saw Edward's photo leaning against the folder Clara had left. His smile was still there, steady, calm, like he already knew. I whispered, You always told me I was stronger than I thought. I just never believed it. For the first time since losing everything, I didn't feel broken. I felt something else, a quiet kind of strength. They thought I was finished. But they were wrong. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every person they had hurt, and I was going to make sure they paid for it. Clara came the morning after I gave her the list of names. She sat at the small table in my hotel room, opened her laptop, and went straight to work. "We need proof," she said. "If they forged your signature, we can fight it. But if the paperwork looks clean on the surface, we need something that ties them to the crime. Call recordings, emails, witnesses." I listened and felt something like hope for the first time since Lydia shut that door. She explained what we had to do in plain terms. If they talked about forcing you to sign or bragged about how they took advantage of you, that's gold. If we can get those words on tape, the prosecutors will listen. I nodded, even though the idea of sneaking back into my own house made my stomach flip. I wasn't a spy. I wasn't brave. I was a woman who taught kids to count and read. But Clara looked at me with that patient stare she always had and said, "You're braver than you think, Evelyn. I'll be on the other end. You won't be alone." We started with the notary and the title company. Clara made calls, and the next day we went together to the real estate office that handled most of Blue Ridge's paperwork. The clerk at the counter shuffled some papers and said, "We don't usually talk about clients." When Clara mentioned my name and the company, the clerk's face changed. He murmured, "Blue Ridge bought more than 8 properties in Maplewood. We handled some transfers. I can't say more without a court order." He wouldn't give names, but he gave us a list of dates and file numbers. It was something. Not much, but it was something. On the drive back, Clara handed me a small silver bracelet. "This has a recorder hidden inside," she said. "It's small. If you can get close enough to them and press the button, it will stream to me. If they say anything that ties them to the fraud, I'll have it." I turned the bracelet over in my hands. It was light and plain, like any old bracelet I might have worn when I was younger. I felt foolish and scared, but I put it on anyway. I thought of Edward, how he used to tell me truth matters. I whispered to the bracelet like it was a promise. "If anything happens, be brave." Clara went over the plan 3 times. We mapped out who I might run into, where I could hide if someone saw me, how I would get the recorder to her. "Don't go in alone if you can help it," she said. "If it feels dangerous, get out. Call me right away." She told me to pretend I was picking up some things I thought had been misplaced. I nodded and tried to memorize the steps. My hands trembled, but I felt steadier than before. The quiet anger in my chest had turned into something useful. Focus. A few days later, I found a reason to go back. I told myself I was collecting a forgotten sweater, some small thing I missed. The truth was easier to say than to do. When I walked up the path and pressed the doorbell, my heart beat like a drum. I kept my head down and walked straight to the side gate. The driveway still smelled like damp earth. The boxes were still there, covered by a tarp. I moved slowly, pretending to look for a place to set down my bag. Inside, voices came from the kitchen. Lydia's laugh, Victor's low hum of conversation. I stayed by the side of the house, close enough to the kitchen window to hear but not to be seen. I pressed the little button on the bracelet without thinking too much about it. It was cold under my finger, and then a tiny light flashed to show it was recording. They were talking about taxes, about permits, about a permit expected next spring. I kept the recorder hidden under a fold of my sleeve and edged closer to the back door. Victor was saying, "Once the permit goes through, the value jumps. These parcels will be worth a fortune." Lydia replied casually, "We just needed a few more signatures." She was easy in the hospital. I felt my stomach drop. She said my name like she was talking about a thing, not a person. I could hear Victor laughing at something and Helena saying, "Make sure the nurse did her part." 2 days more and she would have been gone. I stopped breathing. They were planning more than fraud. The words were sharp and cruel. I pressed my hand to my mouth to stop the sound escaping. For a moment I thought I would pass out. Then footsteps in the backyard. Someone turned toward the window. I froze. It was Daniel in his pajamas looking out for the cat, or maybe just checking the yard. He stepped right between me and the window. For a second I thought he might see me. He didn't. He was looking at something else, rubbing his eyes. My heart thudded so loud I thought they'd hear it. I backed away slowly, but as I did, I accidentally kicked an empty tin can. It clattered loud in the quiet. Inside, voices changed. I heard Victor say sharply, "Who's out there?" I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy. I moved faster, down the side of the house, trying to put distance between me and them. Footsteps behind me. Strong hands grabbed my wrist, pulling me back. Victor had come around the side of the house. He pulled me up against him like I was a thief. "What do you think you're doing here?" he barked. I told him I was looking for a lost sweater. He laughed, but there was menace in his voice. You should leave, old woman. This is private property. His grip hurt, but I kept my voice steady. I'm just taking what's mine. That's when Lydia stepped out, her face hard. She said, You shouldn't be here. You're making trouble. She reached into her bag and grabbed a phone. I fumbled for the bracelet and pressed the small emergency button twice, the one Clara told me about. It sent a silent ping to her phone and to the number she gave the detective. I didn't know if it went through. I hoped. Victor shoved me a little harder and said, Get out of here. I walked away on shaky legs, but my hand was still on the bracelet. I kept it pressed to my sleeve, the recorder still on. I could hear them shouting behind me, something about calling the police, something about trespassing. I walked faster, every step burning, until I reached the alley and could breathe a little. I ducked into the shadow of a hedge and sat down on a low wall, my chest heaving. The bracelet in my sleeve vibrated. Clara's voice came through my ear like she was right there. Evelyn, stay where you are. Are you okay? She asked. I could barely speak. They know I was there, I whispered. They pushed me. She was calm. Hold on. I'm calling Detective Monroe now. She told me where to wait so I would be safe and told me to keep the bracelet on. Did you get anything? She asked. I tapped my sleeve. I think so. They said permits. They said the nurse did her part. Clara's voice changed. Good. That may be enough to get a subpoena. Detective Ray was waiting at the end of the alley 10 minutes later, like he'd appeared out of nowhere. He looked serious and professional, like someone who had seen worse. He took my statement, asked for details, and promised he would follow up. He said they would check hospital records and the company accounts. Thank you for coming forward, Mrs. Hartwell, he said. We'll do our best. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to feel safe. Afterward, Clara and I sat in my car for a long time. She hugged me, squeezed my shoulder, and said, You did the right thing. I felt small and tired, but something in me had shifted. I had words on a tape that tied them to the plan. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. The legal work would be long and ugly, and it might hurt to watch the people I loved be dragged into court. But the idea that I could stand up and be heard made me feel steadier. That night, I slept for the first time since I left the hospital. It wasn't a deep sleep, but it was sleep that came, because my hands had done something besides clutch a photograph. I had recorded their voices. I had risked being seen. I had pushed back. The next day, Clara filed for a preservation order on the company records and asked for a meeting with the county investigator. The wheels began to turn. I kept wearing the bracelet after that. I used it a few more times, always careful, always pretending to be someone who belonged there. I listened in on conversations that showed how they swapped titles, how they convinced neighbors to sign, how they rounded up signatures under false promises. My hands shook every time, but each recording built the pile of proof Clara needed. Sometimes, when it got too hard, I would sit with Edward's letter and read a line or two. He had always said, "Stand up when you must, and hold on to truth." That line kept me moving. I wasn't a young woman anymore, but I had a stubbornness that wouldn't let me back down. People ask me how I found the courage. The truth is, I didn't find courage all at once. I found it in small steps, pressing a button, walking away when they grabbed me, calling Clara, telling the detective what I'd heard. Step by step, the fear got a little smaller. We kept working. Clara sent subpoenas. Detective Monroe checked hospital logs. The title company started to look nervous. Blue Ridge's purchases were suddenly under scrutiny. The Moreaus were not as quiet as they thought. The house they took from me had become the reason people were finally paying attention. They thought they could push an old woman aside and no one would care. They were wrong. Seattle rain never really stops. It just slows down enough to let you think you can walk in it. That night, I put on my old gray coat, grabbed an umbrella, and went back to Maplewood Lane. I told myself I wasn't afraid, but my hands were shaking. The street was quiet. Every porch light glowed behind curtains. Every house asleep except one, mine. From across the street, I could see light coming from the kitchen window. The same kitchen where I used to bake with Daniel when he was little. Now strangers stood there talking about the home they stole. I stepped closer, careful not to make a sound. Then I heard Victor's voice, low and sharp. "One more signature, Lydia. One more, and the whole block is ours." Lydia laughed softly. "That old woman will be back in the hospital soon anyway. Deanna knows what to do." My stomach turned cold. Deanna, the nurse from the hospital. I remembered her face, the one who brought me the papers to sign. My hands trembled. I pressed the small button on my bracelet. The red light blinked once, then stayed on. The recorder was live. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like the rain itself could hear it. The sounds from inside were clear, the tick of a wall clock, glasses clinking, Victor's heavy footsteps. Then Lydia spoke again. "Just another painkiller dose," she said. "She won't wake up next time." I froze. My breath caught in my throat. They weren't just stealing houses, they were planning to kill me. I could feel my knees go weak. The world blurred for a second, like everything stopped making sense. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The truth hit me like a slap. They'd tried to kill me before. Those extra doses of pain medicine in the hospital, the confusion, the fog. I thought it was just the medication. It wasn't. It was them. I took a step back, then another. My shoe hit something, a ceramic flower pot. It tipped, hit the ground, and shattered loud enough to make my heart stop. The voices inside went silent. Then I heard Victor shout, "What was that?" Chairs scraped the floor. Footsteps, fast ones. The kitchen door burst open. He stood there in the doorway, rain splashing at his feet, his face twisted with anger. "What the hell are you doing here?" he shouted. His voice was louder than the rain. I tried to stay calm, though my heart was racing. "I came for what's mine," I said quietly. Victor stepped forward, his hand still holding a glass. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "You're trespassing." His tone had that cold authority I'd heard before, the kind of voice that thinks money is power. Behind him, Lydia appeared, eyes wide. For a moment, she looked shocked, like she hadn't expected to see me alive. Then her face hardened. "You shouldn't have come back," she said. I glanced down at the bracelet and made sure the red light was still blinking. "I never left," I said. Victor came closer. "You've got nerve," he said. "You think anyone will believe you? You signed everything away." I looked him straight in the eye. "Maybe. But I didn't sign my life away." He took another step forward, close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You don't understand how this works, old woman. No one's going to listen to you." I took a step back, just enough to stay out of reach. My hands were shaking, but my voice wasn't. "Maybe not tonight," I said, "but someone's already listening." That's when Lydia noticed the bracelet. Her eyes went wide, her face changed. "She's recording," she screamed. Victor lunged forward, trying to grab me. I turned and ran. I could hear their footsteps behind me, the sound of the door slamming open wider, their voices shouting through the rain. I ran down the path, the umbrella slipping from my hand. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. I didn't look back. I just ran. The rain was cold, soaking through my coat, but I didn't care. The recorder was still blinking, still alive. That was all that mattered. When I reached the corner, I saw headlights. A car pulled up. It was Clara. She must have tracked the signal. She jumped out and ran to me. "Evelyn, get in," she shouted. I stumbled into the car, out of breath, shaking. Clara grabbed my hand. "Did you get it?" she asked. I nodded, too shaken to speak. She reached over and pressed the stop button on the bracelet. The light went off. "It's all here," she said, clutching it. "We got them." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The rain kept hitting the windshield in heavy waves. Clara's hands were tight on the wheel, her jaw set. "They tried to kill you," she said finally, her voice breaking. I nodded slowly. "I know." She took a deep breath. "I'm calling Detective Monroe now. He's been waiting for this." I leaned back in the seat, exhausted, shaking, but there was a strange calm settling in me. For weeks, I'd been running from fear, from loss, from betrayal. Tonight, I ran towards something, truth. Clara's voice broke through the sound of the rain. "You did it, Evelyn. You got proof." I looked out the window, the familiar street now fading behind us, and whispered, "Edward, I finally did what you taught me. I didn't hide from the truth." We drove through the empty streets until the lights of downtown appeared. I held onto the bracelet, feeling the metal still warm from my skin. For the first time in months, my hands stopped shaking. The people who took everything from me thought I was weak. They thought an old woman couldn't fight back. But they were wrong. Victor grabbed my shoulder so hard it felt like his fingers could leave bruises. His face was red, his breath thick with whiskey. "You think you can beat us, old woman?" he hissed. "You think anyone's going to believe your little stories?" He pushed me toward the living room, his grip rough and mean. Lydia was behind him trying to hide her phone. Brenda was yelling something I couldn't make out. My heart was pounding, but my mind stayed sharp. I slid my thumb along the side of the bracelet and pressed the small SOS button Clara had shown me. The light blinked once, then turned off. The signal was sent. Victor didn't notice. He was too busy shouting. You should have stayed quiet. You had everything. Your pension, your comfort. But no, you had to stick your nose where it didn't belong. I looked him in the eye, even though my voice shook. You took everything. My house, my savings, my peace. And you thought I'd stay quiet? Lydia came closer, her voice trembling, not from fear but from rage. You think a recording will save you? You broke into our property. That's a crime too. I turned my head slowly toward her. The difference is, I said, my crime has witnesses. Brenda screamed from the hallway. Victor, the lights, someone's outside. I glanced toward the window, headlights, flashing, bright white beams cutting through the rain. For a second, nobody moved. Then Victor shoved me aside and ran to the front door. Lydia followed, shouting for him to close it. The sound of sirens grew louder, fast, close, impossible to ignore. I felt my knees weaken. Relief and fear tangled together inside me. It was happening. Clara had gotten through. The front door burst open and a flood of blue and red light filled the living room. Police! Someone shouted. Everyone stay where you are. Detective Ray Monroe stepped in first, rain dripping from his coat, his face set in that calm, steady way only people who've seen too much can manage. He raised his badge. Blue Ridge Properties, he said loudly. You're all under arrest for fraud, forgery, and attempted murder. Victor froze. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not anger, not arrogance, real fear. Lydia tried to say something, but Monroe cut her off. Hands where I can see them. 2 officers rushed forward. One grabbed Victor's arm, the other moved toward Brenda, who was shouting and crying. Lydia backed up against the wall, her voice cracking. You can't prove anything, she yelled. Monroe turned to me and nodded. We can now. He pointed to my wrist. That recording you just made, it's enough. I stood still, unable to move. My breathing came in short bursts. Everything I'd been holding in, weeks of fear, humiliation, pain, suddenly lifted off me. Victor tried one last time to twist free. You can't do this. We were just doing business, he shouted. Monroe didn't even look at him. Business doesn't include killing your client, he said coldly. Lydia screamed as 2 officers handcuffed her. She's lying. That old witch is lying. But her voice didn't carry the same power anymore. It sounded desperate. I felt my legs give out and I sat down slowly on the couch, still shaking. Clara appeared in the doorway a moment later, soaked from the rain. She walked straight to me, knelt down, and took my hand. It's over, Evelyn, she said softly. They're done. I looked at her and tried to smile, but tears rolled down my cheeks. It's strange, I said quietly. I thought I'd feel happy, but I don't. Just lighter. Outside, the rain mixed with the red glow of police lights. The neighborhood was awake now, people peeking out through curtains, whispering, pointing. The same street that had watched me lose everything was now watching justice unfold. Monroe walked back over to me. You were brave, he said. Most people wouldn't have come back here. I shook my head. I wasn't brave, I said. I was just tired of being silent. He nodded. Sometimes that's all it takes. They led the Monroes out one by one. Lydia's face was pale, Victor's jaw tight. Brenda muttered under her breath, still denying everything. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed louder than any of their words. When the last patrol car pulled away, Monroe turned back to me. We'll need you to make a full statement tomorrow, he said gently. But for tonight, go home. Get some rest. I stood there in the doorway, staring at the empty street. The house was still mine, but it didn't feel like it. It was just a place full of memories, good ones and bad ones. Clara wrapped her arm around my shoulders. Let's go, she said. You've done enough for one night. As we walked toward her car, the sirens faded into the distance. The only sound left was the rain hitting the pavement. I looked back one last time. The lights inside the house were still on, but the noise was gone. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't the one standing outside in the dark. In the quiet that followed, I whispered to myself, I don't feel proud. I just feel at peace. Maybe that's what justice really is. It's not loud, not triumphant. It's quiet, heavy, and right on time. At the police station, everything felt too bright and too quiet. The walls, the hum of the lights, the sound of paper sliding on the table, it all felt distant. Clara sat beside me, a folder open in front of her. Detective Monroe stood across the table, his hands resting on a stack of documents. Clara looked at me for a long time before she spoke. Her voice was calm, but there was something heavy in it. "Evelyn," she said softly, "the beneficiary of the fake life insurance policy, the one Lydia set up, is Daniel." For a second, I didn't understand. The words just floated in the air, meaningless sounds. Then it hit me. My throat closed. I shook my head. "No," I said, my voice barely there. "That's not possible." Clara reached across the table, her hand resting gently on mine. I checked everything twice. Lydia used Daniel's name to make it look legitimate. The paperwork is clean, but we can't tell yet if he knew. I felt the air leave my lungs. My chest hurt. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. He wouldn't," I whispered. "He couldn't." Detective Monroe cleared his throat quietly. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said in that steady tone of his, "there's a chance your son signed something without realizing what it was. Lydia was smart. She could have used him." I nodded slowly, but the words didn't help. They just made the hole in my chest feel deeper. My son's name, written on a paper that could have meant my death. I stared at the file. His signature was there. I knew it. I'd seen that handwriting since the day he learned to write his name. My voice cracked. "He was there," I said. "That day in the hospital. Lydia handed me the papers, said they were for insurance. He was standing right next to her. He didn't look at me. He just looked down." Clara's eyes softened. "Evelyn, you don't know if he understood what she was doing." But I remembered it clearly. The way Daniel's shoulders had tensed, the way his voice had gone quiet when I asked what the papers were for, the silence that followed. I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. Maybe he knew and just couldn't stop it. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint buzz of the ceiling light and the shuffle of Monroe's papers. He finally said, "We'll question him soon. For now, we're treating him as a witness, not a suspect. But we have to be ready for anything." I nodded, though I wasn't really listening anymore. My eyes stayed on Daniel's name printed at the bottom of the page. It looked so neat, so familiar, so final. Clara closed the folder gently. "You should go home and rest," she said. "You've done enough." But how could I rest? My mind kept replaying every memory. Daniel's laugh when he was a boy, the way he hugged me before college, the times he called me Mom in that soft, tired voice. Was any of that still real? I looked up at Clara. "If he knew," I said slowly, "what kind of mother am I? How did I raise a son who could stand there and let them do this?" She didn't answer. She just held my hand a little tighter. Detective Monroe stood and gathered the files. "We'll find out," he said. "But whatever the truth is, it's better you know it than live in the dark." I nodded again, but my heart wasn't ready for the truth. As we walked out of the room, I saw my reflection in the glass wall. Tired eyes, trembling hands, a woman who'd survived everything except the idea that her own child might have betrayed her. Outside, the night air was cold. I took a deep breath, but it didn't help. Clara opened the car door for me. I got in and stared out the window as we drove away from the station. The city lights passed by like blurs of color. I didn't see them. I was somewhere else, back in that hospital room, with Lydia's fake smile and Daniel's silence. He had stood right there, close enough to see me struggle to hold the pen. He could have said something. He didn't. I pressed my hand against my chest. It hurt to breathe. I wasn't angry anymore. Not even sad. Just empty. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe he was trapped like I was. But deep down, a part of me feared the truth I didn't want to say out loud. Maybe he did know, and he chose to stay quiet. That thought stayed with me all night. Sometimes silence can be crueler than lies. The visiting room was cold and quiet. Just a long table, a sheet of glass, and 2 chairs. I sat down on my side, my hands clasped together. On the other side, Daniel walked in with a guard behind him. His hair was messy, his face pale, dark circles under his eyes. When he sat, he didn't look at me right away. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I watched him, my son, The same boy who once held my hand crossing the street, now sitting behind glass in a gray jumpsuit. He finally looked up, his eyes wet. "Mom," he said, his voice low and hoarse. "I didn't know what they were going to do. I swear I didn't. Lydia told me it was just a temporary transfer, something about the house taxes and your hospital bills. I thought it was legal. I thought—" He stopped, the words stuck in his throat. I didn't move. I just asked quietly, "How many times did you sign papers you didn't read, Daniel?" He looked down, his shoulders shaking. "Too many," he said through tears. "I was scared. I owed them money. Lydia said it would fix everything. I didn't want to lose her or Sophia. I just wanted peace." I swallowed hard. "And you thought peace meant watching them take everything from me?" He shook his head violently. "No, I never wanted to hurt you. I thought once it was done, I could undo it, fix it somehow. I didn't know about the insurance or the nurse. I didn't know they wanted you gone. When I found out, it was too late." He put his hand on the glass, fingers trembling. "I'm sorry, Mom. I know sorry isn't enough, but I don't know what else to say." For a long moment, I just stared at that hand. I remembered when it used to hold mine so tightly as a child, when he used to run into my arms after school. I remembered that warmth, and now, all I could feel was distance. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small folded envelope. It was worn at the edges, the paper yellowed with time. I placed it against the glass. "Your father wrote this," I said quietly. "He left it for me before he passed, but I think it's meant for you now." Daniel hesitated, then the guard handed the letter to him. He opened it carefully, his hands trembling, and began to read out loud in a whisper. "If one day you find yourself lost, or if the people you love turn away, remember this. Do not let bitterness consume you. If you must face betrayal, choose forgiveness, but never silence." Daniel's voice broke at the last word. Tears fell onto the paper. He pressed it to his chest like it was something sacred. I watched him for a while. "Your father believed in you," I said softly. "He believed you would find your way back. I hope he was right." Daniel wiped his face, still crying. "I'll tell them everything," he said. "I'll testify. I'll make it right. I promise." I nodded slowly. "Do that, Daniel. Not for me, for yourself, for Sophia." He nodded, his face full of guilt and pain. "Do you hate me?" he asked. I took a deep breath. The question hung in the air, heavy. I shook my head. "No," I said quietly, "but I don't know how to love you the same way yet." He closed his eyes, tears still falling. "I understand." The guard tapped the glass lightly, signaling time was up. Daniel looked at me one last time, his lips trembling as if he wanted to say something else but couldn't. I stood slowly. "Take care of yourself," I said. He whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." I turned and walked toward the door. My hands were cold, but my chest felt lighter. I didn't look back. As I stepped outside, the air hit my face. Crisp, sharp, real. I looked up at the gray sky and whispered, "Edward, I did what you asked. I forgave him." Then I added quietly, "But I will never be silent again." Inside, somewhere behind those walls, my son was crying. But for the first time, I didn't cry with him. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It just means choosing to live without hate. And that was how I began to heal. The courtroom in Seattle County was packed. Every seat filled with faces I recognized. Neighbors from Maplewood, people who had lost their homes, their peace, their savings. I sat in the second row with Clara beside me. The air was heavy, not with fear anymore, but with something quieter, expectation. The judge entered, his robe sweeping behind him. Everyone stood. The shuffle of chairs, the murmurs, the sound of breathing. It all faded when he spoke. "We are here today to deliver the final judgment in the case of Blue Ridge Properties versus the state of Washington." Across the room, Lydia sat stiffly between two guards. Her hair was pulled back, but her eyes were wild, darting between the crowd and the judge. Victor sat beside her, his shoulders slumped, his hands clasped tight. Helena was crying silently, clutching a handkerchief. Deanna, the nurse, kept her head down, not daring to look up. The judge began to read the sentences. His voice was calm, measured, but each word felt like a stone being placed on the ground, heavy and final. "Lydia Moreau, 20 years in prison for fraud and attempted manslaughter." Lydia gasped. No, you can't do this. I was trying to help my family. Her voice cracked, desperate, but no one answered. The bailiff told her to stay seated. The judge continued, Victor Moreau and Helena Moreau, 15 and 18 years in prison for organized fraud and coercion. Victor's head fell forward. For the first time, he didn't argue. He didn't shout. He just stared at the table, hands trembling. Helena sobbed quietly, repeating something under her breath. The room stayed silent. Then the judge turned a page. Deanna Clark, 8 years in prison for medical malpractice and conspiracy. The nurse nodded slowly, tears sliding down her face. She didn't deny it. Maybe she had already made peace with the truth. And then, the name I was both dreading and waiting for, Daniel Hartwell, 4 years in state prison for aiding in the fraudulent transfer of assets, sentence reduced due to full cooperation and testimony against the defendants. I closed my eyes. Even though I had known this was coming, hearing it out loud still hurt. Daniel sat apart from the others, his wrists cuffed. When the judge said his name, he didn't move. He just nodded slightly, like a man who finally accepted what he'd done. Clara's hand found mine. You did it, she whispered. But I didn't feel victorious. I just felt still. When the judge finished reading, the courtroom stayed silent for a moment, as if everyone needed to breathe again. Then the gavel hit the desk. Court is adjourned. It was over. Lydia shouted something as the guards took her away. You think this changes anything? People like us always come back. But her voice didn't echo the way it used to. It just faded into the room, small and bitter. Victor followed, his eyes empty. Helena couldn't even walk. Straight. Deanna whispered a quiet "I'm sorry" as she passed, though I wasn't sure if it was meant for me or for herself. And then Daniel stood. His eyes searched for mine. When he found them, he mouthed the words, "Thank you." I didn't nod. I didn't smile. I just held his gaze. For the first time in months, he didn't look away. The guards let him out. I sat there until the courtroom emptied, my hands still on my lap. The quiet that followed was almost too much. When we stepped outside, the air smelled faintly of rain. Reporters were waiting near the steps, their microphones pointed toward me. I heard questions. How does it feel to win? Do you forgive your son? But I didn't answer. I just kept walking. The people of Maplewood were gathered on the courthouse lawn. Mrs. Navarro was there holding my hand. Mr. Patel nodded from a distance. A few neighbors came up and thanked me, saying things like, "You gave us hope and you made them pay." I smiled softly, but inside I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about everything we'd lost. The years, the memories, the trust. Justice doesn't give those things back. It doesn't heal what betrayal takes. But it does something else. It stops the bleeding. That night, I sat alone in my living room, the house finally mine again. The walls were bare. Most of my things were gone, but I didn't mind. It felt peaceful, quiet in a way I hadn't felt in years. I lit a candle and placed it beside Edward's photo. The flame flickered gently, reflecting off the frame. "It's done," I whispered. "They've paid for what they did." The words felt strange in my mouth. Not triumphant. Just true. Outside, the rain started again. I listened to it, steady and familiar. I thought about Daniel, about the day he'd walk free. Maybe we'd talk again. Maybe we wouldn't. But at least the truth was out. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. For the first time since that day at the door, I wasn't afraid anymore. Justice doesn't return youth or erase pain. But sometimes it makes the guilty bow their heads. And for me, that was enough. It had been a month since the trial. The neighborhood was quieter now. Maplewood Lane looked almost the same from the outside, but to me everything felt different. When the taxi turned the corner, my heart beat faster. The house stood there at the end of the street, the paint fresh and light again. Someone from the city had helped restore it as part of the settlement. The old wood smell mixed with something new, like a second chance. I stood in front of the gate for a long moment before walking in. The steps creaked the way they always had. The front door opened easily, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I stepped inside without fear. The house was mostly empty. Some furniture had been sold during the chaos, but the walls were still mine. The light from the window fell on the floor in soft patches. I walked from room to room, touching the places that once felt like home. The kitchen counter, the picture frame still hanging crooked, the windowsill where Edward used to set his coffee mug. I found one of his old notebooks tucked inside a drawer. His handwriting was still there, strong, neat, full of patience. I ran my fingers over it, as if touching those words could bring him closer. The smell of lilac drifted in from outside. Mrs. Navarro must have planted some new flowers in the garden. I smiled. A knock came at the door. When I opened it, Mrs. Navarro stood there, holding a small box of pastries. "I heard you were back," she said, her voice warm. "I made your favorite, cinnamon and apple." I invited her in. She looked around and sighed softly. "It feels right again," she said, "like Maplewood is breathing again." We sat at the table with 2 cups of tea, the same table Edward and I had shared for years. The silence between us wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "If it weren't for you, Evelyn, we would have lost everything. They would have taken the whole block." I smiled and shook my head. "No, Maria, we saved each other. I just happened to be the first one who got angry enough to stop hiding." She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that comes after too much sadness. "You gave us courage," she said. We talked for a while about the neighborhood, about the Patels reopening their store, about how the Andersons' grandson was moving back in. Life was slowly coming back to Maplewood. After she left, I stayed by the window. The sun had started to set, and the light poured through the glass in long, golden lines. It landed on the mantel where Edward's photo stood. I picked it up and smiled at his familiar face. "Everything's all right now," I whispered. "The house is safe. The neighbors are safe. Daniel's trying. He writes every week. He says he's reading again, helping the other inmates with their GEDs. Maybe there's hope." I set the photo back down, and the sunlight hit the frame just right. The reflection trembled across the wall, soft and warm. For the first time in years, the silence in the house didn't scare me. It felt gentle, like the pause between heartbeats. I brewed another cup of tea and opened the back door. The garden looked alive again, small green shoots breaking through the soil, the lilac bushes swaying in the light wind. Mrs. Navarro waved from her porch. I waved back. Sometimes justice doesn't look like punishment. It looks like a neighborhood rebuilt. It sounds like laughter returning to a quiet street. I sat on the porch and watched the streetlights flicker on one by one. A young couple walked by with their dog. Somewhere a child was laughing. The world had moved on, but this time I was moving with it. I thought of all that had happened, the betrayal, the fear, the courtroom, the tears, and then I thought of this moment. The stillness, the warmth, the quiet proof that life goes on. I closed my eyes and whispered in neg, "Thank you, Edward, for reminding me that forgiveness doesn't mean weakness. It means choosing peace." Inside, the clock ticked softly. The air smelled of wood polish and lilac. I looked once more at the wedding photo on the wall. The sunlight shimmered over it, trembling gently like a heartbeat. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I'd survived. The morning of the ceremony was calm. The sky was clear, and Maplewood felt alive again. People were out tending their gardens, painting fences, talking to neighbors like nothing had ever happened. For the first time in years, the street didn't feel haunted by fear or loss. It felt normal. At the community center, the chairs were already set up. A simple banner hung on the wall, Edward Hartwell Foundation, protecting our elders, preserving their dignity. Clara stood by the entrance talking to Detective Ray Monroe. When she saw me, she smiled. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." Inside, the hall wasn't fancy, just rows of folding chairs, a few bouquets, and a small wooden podium. But it was full of people I knew. Mrs. Navarro sat in the front row, holding her husband's hand. Mr. Patel was there too, wearing his old store apron, as if to remind everyone that small shops still mattered. And near the back, I saw 3 of my former students, grown now, with children of their own. It was strange, standing in front of them again. I had been a teacher for 30 years, and yet I'd never felt as nervous as I did that morning. Clara adjusted the microphone for me and whispered, "Just speak from the heart, Evelyn, like you always do." When I stepped up, the room went quiet. I could feel the weight of every eye, every story, every scar that had brought us all here. I took a deep breath and began. "When I first came home from the hospital," I said, my voice steady, "I thought I'd lost everything. My house, my savings, my faith in people, But what I really lost was something smaller and more dangerous. I lost my voice. There were nods in the audience. I could see it in their faces. They knew that silence, that feeling of being dismissed, ignored, erased. I believed that if I stayed quiet, things would somehow fix themselves, that if I forgave and waited long enough, people would change. But silence doesn't heal. Silence protects the ones who hurt us. A hush fell over the room. Even Detective Ray looked down, thoughtful. So, if anyone here has ever had their trust stolen, by family, by friends, by strangers, please remember this. You can start over. You can rebuild. But don't do it quietly. Speak up. Ask for help. Because silence is just another word for surrender. I paused, looking at the people in front of me. Some had tears in their eyes. This foundation, I continued, isn't about money or charity. It's about giving people back their dignity. It's about making sure no one feels alone when the world turns its back on them. And it's for Edward, my husband, who believed that kindness is not weakness, and that truth, even when it hurts, is still worth telling. For a second, my voice broke. I took a slow breath and smiled through the sting in my eyes. If someone ever steals your trust, I said softly, don't let fear turn you into a bystander. Because silence is complicity with injustice. The room erupted in applause. It wasn't loud or wild, but it felt real, genuine. People stood, some clapped, some just wiped their faces, and for a moment I saw him. Edward. Not truly there, of course, but I could almost see him standing at the back of the room, arms crossed, smiling the way he used to when I did something brave but reckless. It was only in my mind, but it felt real enough to make me catch my breath. Clara touched my shoulder gently. He'd be proud of you, she said. I nodded, still looking toward the space where I imagined him. I think he already is. After the ceremony, people came up to me one by one, neighbors, friends, even strangers who had heard about the case. They thanked me, told me their own stories. Some cried, some just held my hand. Detective Ray stopped by before leaving. You turned something ugly into something good, he said. That doesn't happen often. It's the only way I knew how to make peace with it, I replied. When everyone was gone, I stayed a little longer. The hall was empty except for the sound of the cleaning crew stacking chairs. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows, landing on the banner. The words, Edward Hartwell Foundation, glowed in the light. I walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street below. Children were riding their bikes. A man was sweeping his porch. The world kept turning, just as Edward always said it would. I whispered almost to myself, We did it, Edward, you and I. The reflection in the glass looked like him for just a second. Faint, smiling, proud. Then it was gone, and all that remained was me. But that was enough, because this time I wasn't the woman who lost everything. I was the woman who turned her pain into something that could protect others. And that, I thought, was the truest kind of justice. Seattle was quiet that night, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the world had finally taken a breath and decided to rest. I sat in the backyard, the same place Edward and I once spent every summer evening. The air was cool, gentle, and carried the faint scent of lilac. The garden looked different now. New plants, new soil, but the lilac bushes had survived everything. They were in full bloom, their pale purple petals glowing softly under the porch light. I didn't plan it this way. They just bloomed, as if they knew tonight was meant to be special. In front of me was a small stone marker. Nothing grand, just a simple piece of marble with the words, Edward Hartwell, my true north. I reached out and brushed the dust from his name. My fingers trembled, not from age, but from everything this journey had cost. For a long while, I didn't say anything. I just sat there, listening to the wind move through the garden and the quiet hum of the city far beyond. Finally, I whispered, I did it, Edward. It took me longer than I thought, but I did it. The words came out softer than I expected, carried by the night air. You always said justice isn't for the strong, it's for those who don't give up. I smiled faintly. You were right, as always. I thought about everything that had happened, the house, the betrayal, the courtroom, the faces of the people who stood by me. I thought of Daniel's letters, his careful handwriting, his words of regret and hope. I thought of Clara and Detective Ray, of Mrs. Navarro's laughter when she said Maplewood finally felt alive again. For the first time, none of it hurt anymore. It was just part of the story. My story. The candle beside the stone flickered, its small flame bending with the wind but never going out. I watched it closely, and for a moment it felt like Edward was sitting beside me again, quiet, steady, smiling the way he always did when I finally learned one of his hard lessons. "I'm all right now," I said softly, "and I think you'd be proud of me." The wind picked up, rustling the lilac leaves. It almost sounded like an answer, gentle, reassuring, gone as soon as it came. I leaned back in my chair and looked up at the night sky. The stars were faint, but enough. Seattle lights always dim them, but tonight they seemed closer. I closed my eyes and let the quiet fill me. The scent of lilac was stronger now, warm, steady, familiar. It wasn't just a smell, it was memory. It was Edward. It was everything I'd fought to protect. I whispered one last time, "Good night, my love." The camera would have pulled back here, I suppose, past the garden, past the candlelight, showing the small house bathed in soft yellow glow, the lilacs swaying gently in the wind, the marker barely visible among the flowers. The screen would fade to black, and before the light disappeared completely, the words would appear, "Edward Hartwell, Foundation for Those Who Refuse to Be Silent." And somewhere between the night and the dawn, the lilacs kept blooming.